Moving on to 14.2, Mr. McGlynn. And before you move on, I would like to announce, as you'll notice on the agenda, it shows that the council will take a dinner break at some point. I can't tell you, we're moving along fairly rapidly this evening, so I'm not sure exactly when that's going to happen. When it does, we'll take a half an hour break. We may get through the whole agenda before that happens. It's a pretty meaty agenda, but we will definitely be through the housing piece, 14.2, before that break happens.
Item 14.2. Report, Santa Rosa Housing Report 5, Housing Action Plan.
Yeah, okay.
Dave Gwine and David Guin presenting.
Good evening, Mayor Sawyer, members of the City Council. Today is a consolidation of your previous actions on several funding and housing program areas that we put into a work plan to factor current and potential future funding resources. The purpose of today's meeting is to have the Council accept this comprehensive 2016 Santa Rosa Housing Action Plan and help us prioritize its implementation. We will use a few slides to hit the plan highlights, the specifics of which are contained in the body of the 41-page document which was attached to the staff report. And we also use this opportunity to introduce a bold financing idea for your consideration next week during budget deliberations. So by way of Housing for All, quickly on the background, you received 2 housing reports in February that presented a review of the housing programs in Housing and Community Services and Planning and Economic Development. And at that meeting, Council recommended that staff begin work on implementing 7 funding action steps, which we'll review today. Housing Reports 3 and 4 took place in April, focusing on the results of developer interviews that help inform our recommendations to begin work on 5 broad housing program areas, which we'll touch on again today. But we want to move through those quickly to show how the plan will be included in a continued outreach effort, prioritize the plan components, and look at next steps. So the mission of the Housing for All plan is specifically meeting the housing needs of the full spectrum of household income groups, including those currently living in Santa Rosa and those relocating to the city in the future. Housing for All. And we want to just make the point that the Santa Rosa Housing Action Plan is accumulation of the whole and aligns with the Santa Rosa General Plan, the housing element, your council goals and priority, previous study sessions, and city and staff and consultant research going through the plan development over the last few months. So here's a quick review of the council direction received in February. There were 7 components. And of these 7, the first 3 are underway and the last 4 are pending based on staff capacity as it becomes available, or money, or voter approval. So quickly, what's underway is general fund support for housing. You'll be considering those actions next week during budget deliberations. We've launched the commercial linkage fee nexus study, and we're considering short-term investments, one-time money in housing programs and planning services. The others, in the housing impact fee, is a study, a nexus study we look to launch within the fiscal year, 16-17. Seeking voter approval of a tax measure, you'll be looking at preliminary polling data in the next few weeks. The Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District is something we really want to explore. We just have not had the chance to start that work yet.
And I'm just going to segue here. Since this is an example of where council action and direction has stimulated private sector and others from thinking about how they might actually join the city in this initiative. And we suspect that we're going to get more than one conversation coming rapidly forward to the council along these lines about how you can look at a future tax increment to help do the infrastructure work in particular areas. And I think some of the work that you've been doing in the downtown is going to be specifically pointing to that type of conversation. So we're actually seeing this being brought forward by folks in the community to have a conversation with you all about these considerations. This is not your work. The work of the team is creating these types of dividends through this process, and we look forward to having those conversations with you all soon around that particular item.
That's true. That should be before shortly. And then lastly, you asked us to consider a non-discrimination ordinance for the housing choice voucher users. We started collecting some draft ordinances from other communities, and then we looked at state legislation, specifically SB 1053, which was being deliberated in Sacramento. It just ended on May 27th, a little over a week ago, where it didn't come out of the Senate Appropriations Committee. So we'll start and resume that work again at a local level. And I'll turn it over for David here for a second.
Great, thank you, Dave. So the Housing Action Plan that was included in the packet that's online, that's available, has some pretty bold objectives, and the objectives are what are going to drive our efforts through this plan. I'm going to go through these objectives. They're important, and they're going to inform where we're going to go next and how our plan is going to proceed. The first is to build 5,000 housing units in the current housing element cycle. So this is straight out of our housing element cycle plan. There's 5,000 of them. 2,500 of them are affordable units that we're looking at. So 30% of those are in the lower income bracket. That includes extremely low, very low, and low. 20% of those are in the moderate income level. And the other piece of this is preserving our existing stock of 4,000 affordable housing units. And so this is units under contract that typically have a life of 30 to 55 years. So how do we maintain those, preserve those, and extend those when those contracts are up? The next one is achieve 1,000 housing units ready for building permit issuance this year. That is a good goal. I pulled the numbers today, and we're right around. We believe we're on pace to hit about 800 this year. So right now we have issued 224 permits that are issued as of January. That are in. Some of them are actively in construction. We have about 402 that are about ready to be issued. They're in process of going through our building permit process to be issued out and let go. And then I talked in the past about these subdivisions. We have a number of subdivisions. I think there's 17 big subdivisions that are in town right now. And the way those work is the subdivision gets approved, and then the developer comes in and asks to pull certain permits for a certain number of houses for those subdivisions. And currently, this year, we've released 69 of those units are available to be built. And we have 122 that are ready to go when the developer wants to build them. And overall, we have a total of 500 units that are in those subdivisions. So we have a lot of potential. So that's where we get the 800, that the 800 is ready to go this year as the developers are ready to build them.
Excuse me, can you send that to us in writing?
Absolutely, Thank you. And again, I just pulled this today, so I wanted to make sure I had some numbers for you. It's a lot of numbers, but basically, we're going for about 800 units this year, permits that we're going to push out to allow construction. Just so you know, about 387, almost 400 of those are multifamily homes. The last bullet on here is facilitate revitalization of previously entitled units of projects, and that's about 2,000 units. And so these are units that we're finding have a lot of different issues that we're working through. It's financing, it's federal and state regulations that have come up at the 11th hour that are new from when they were approved previously. We're dealing with habitat issues that we're working through with the regional board and Fish and Wildlife. So a lot of issues that are surrounding these 2,000 units, and each one is a little different. But we're having a lot of conversations with state and federal regulators, with developers, with finance people to try to understand this and how we can help and what tools we can bring to the table to help facilitate the process. So we can't do this individually. We can't do this in silos. We have to work together, cross-departmental. So part of this is how we organize ourselves to achieve this goal. And Dave talked about this quite a little bit in the beginning. We reorganized and looked at how could we increase our capacity to deliver these projects. We made it a priority. We're focusing where our efforts are. This interdepartmental the coordination leadership between the two of us and the other department heads and our city manager. Setting priorities is key. So we've set a priority of housing in the Planning and Economic Development Department. We are pushing housing, and we're pushing affordable housing over housing. We're pushing complete affordable housing over affordable housing. So we're prioritizing to make sure we put the effort where it needs to go. And we tell everyone that from the day they walk in the door, and that's how we try to move things through the process. We're looking at new partnerships. How do we partner with other agencies? Like I said, the regional board, with the water agency that has jurisdiction over certain projects. And how do we develop these partnerships so we can move our common goals and interests along with their goals and interests to both be successful?
And on the 28th of this month, you will be entertaining a memorandum of understanding that is a record of this with the school district to try to address a low and moderate income and take it and make this a partnership work, not the city dictating terms and expecting totally deliverables to come from one side of the equation. This is about creating workforce housing for both professional staff and administrative staff in the school district, especially in the entry level. So we're going to be bringing forward a memorandum, hopefully on the 28th, to memorialize that and make that a priority action item for city staff and school district staff moving forward.
Okay, so the plan, and as we mentioned before, a lot of this is brought together from the previous study session that we did, or report item we did for you. We're going to go over this fairly quickly, just to remind the council what the items are, what's in them. The detailed report goes into a lot more detail. If you have questions, we're here to answer them. The operational plan consists of 5 program areas. Again, it's increase inclusionary affordable housing, achieve affordability by design through our housing, assemble and offer public lands for housing development, improve development readiness and opportunity sites, and program 5 is increase housing investment and developer partnerships. We put this slide up here again to put in perspective of where these numbers are coming from, what the issue is, and what we're trying to solve. Essentially, the regional housing needs allocation shows that we need housing throughout. There's more in the above moderate area, but what this shows is where are the programs we have are distributed through the various income levels. So we are touching all areas. Each one is slightly different. Some require more subsidy than others in terms of finance and money. Some require changes in processes, and some require just how we're looking at how we operate in partnerships that we developed, as you just heard. So program 1, the allocation, the inclusionary affordable housing. The first one there is housing allocation plan impact fee changes. So we're going to be looking at those fees, the fees for the impact fees regarding inclusionary housing. The second one is inclusionary housing for sale projects. This is one that was brought up at the last study session that is in here, is described in the report. And the next step on that is to develop a program to make sure that's successful and we can move those projects through. We have regulatory and financial incentives. This is one where you're going to hear more about in the finance section. But this is how can we encourage affordable units, the type of units that we want built here, through incentives, either is monetary incentives or it's through regulatory incentives, things that we can control in terms of density, parking heights, and those type of opportunities. And then we're also looking at we're going to be looking at our local density bonus ordinance amendments. So we currently have a density bonus ordinance through the state. We have the opportunity to refine that and even go more aggressive locally. So we'll be looking at that, what that means, and what opportunities we have there to encourage those densities. Program 2 is Achieve Affordability by Design. Again, this is looking at how we can look at the size of a unit relative to the cost of building that unit, thereby making it more affordable. We're going to look at reducing barriers to second dwelling units constructions. Again, what tools do we have in our tool chest to help support second unit dwelling construction? Either it's parking, deed restrictions, and other things that we have ability to work through. Single occupancy projects. This is, for example, the Palms project that many people are familiar with. How can we're going to be looking at reviewing our code to determine where those might be located, how we might be able to facilitate those through our existing codes and policies. And the last one on here, D, is partnerships with developers of modular homes. We're starting to see more of these projects come through. We have a couple of projects currently on the books. North Street Apartment's a good example of one. Their permit's going to be issued any day. I believe it's ready to go. That one is can we look at pilot projects to see, are there more efficient ways to move those projects through our permitting process with modular homes, working with the state and review processes that are already in place. Program 3, assemble and offer public lands for housing development. So the first one here, as public projects come up, we have the opportunity to work with those public projects to encourage the additional increase of affordable housing. So this is one where as we have the ability, we're going to be promoting this, identifying what the council's goals are, and how do we increase affordability as part of a project that's coming to Santa Rosa. B, identification of public parcels with the development potential. Again, these are opportunity sites that we own as a city. What sites do we have out there that we can look at? How can we leverage those for affordable housing projects? Strategic acquisition of banking and affordable housing parcels. So again, this is a concept as this comes up, as people have land available. We'll be looking at that. Is that something we want to take on? Is that an opportunity that we could use to encourage or incentivize or even establish affordable housing in Santa Rosa? And then the last piece is this revision of policies and procedures for vacation of public right-of-ways. So typically there are slivers and remnants of pieces of property right-of-way that are left over that could be adjacent to potentially developable land. Those remnants could help a project move forward. So we're looking at, do we have the ability to help move those projects forward, allow that to happen, to try to get projects to be successful and move forward and make it possible. And program 4, improve development readiness of sites. So again, this is something that we have a lot of control over in terms of sites that we own and sites that we have a control over. So part of that is identifying what the housing opportunity sites are, what assessments, do an assessment of what's out there, what we have available. Looking at, can we rezone? Can we change the zoning to allow a certain type of product that we're looking for? If we have a desire for increased density, height, are there proactive measures we can take to change zoning, working within the general plan and working through the public process to make sure that's done in a way that facilitates the type of products we want? Specific plan infrastructure improvements. So we have specific plans that have identified certain densities, increased densities, making sure that we have the infrastructure to support those increased densities as water, sewer, storm, road capacity, those types of projects. Can we get those done ahead of time so that when the development does come, they're ready to go? And a lot of that has happened, and that's happened as infrastructure ages and ages out, we replace it to the specific plan needs so the developer doesn't have to come back and replace that again. So those are things that are currently underway. Looking at critical habitat mitigation, and is there a programmatic way that we can take a look at this and deal with this issue? Again, this keeps coming up. I've had 2 meetings today on this issue regarding projects that have run into mitigation issues that we're looking at creative ways with the regional board to either mitigate on-site, mitigate off-site, find changes to the project, which could dramatically reduce the number of units on a site or stop a project completely. So we want to get creative and find a solution that works for everybody, find a solution that supports protection of the endangered species, but also tries to achieve our goals. So it's a difficult problem to solve, but we're working on it.
Mr. Guillen, can I just ask a question about how, as we move forward? This is a good example of something that's going to be taking a lot of work, and because it's very complex. It affects a lot of how we do business in Santa Rosa and how we create housing. How do we, assuming that we move forward with this plan, there are various elements that we're still going to need a fair amount of work. How are the updates going to be given as we move through some of the details of the work that's being articulated here?
So at the end of this, we're going to identify some of the priorities that we feel that we want to move forward first. Some of these are underway. Some of them we're recommending we move forward with additional resources. What's going to happen is each one of these is going to have essentially a program of itself. So they'll involve public participation. It'll involve council meetings. It'll involve public hearings. If we're looking at changing any sort of the code or the policy or anything that has an impact to our existing processes.
Fees,
exactly. That's a public process, and that'll go through the normal public process. What we're outlining here is a comprehensive plan that identifies basically everything that we can think of that will help achieve your goal of developing more housing and specifically affordable housing. And with this is our roadmap. This allows us to point to and say, this is where we want to spend. If we have resources, let's put them here to try to achieve these goals. But nothing will be done in a vacuum, and nothing will be done independently.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that.
Sure. So that leads into the next maybe 4 items on here, D, E, F, and G. These are very public processes that are going to take place. In the mid-year budget, we did talk about these items. We talked specifically about the permit streamlining, the hillside development ordinance revisions, and the design review streamlining. And those are ones where we're developing an RFP that consultants and staff are going to be working together to open this up to a public process, work with our boards and commissions, work with the city council, bring in the stakeholders, identify what the issues are, and try to find a solution together on how we can solve these issues and move forward. So again, none of these will be done just by staff or just by a consultant. They are full public processes.
And just a quick comment on your Program 5, Affordable Housing Investment and Developer Partnerships. This is where we hit the lower income spectrum of the Housing for All, extremely low. And so you'll see here sustaining homeless facilities and programs and expanding subsidies and partnerships. These are all currently listed in our department budget for your consideration next week, and we also have some other ideas we'll submit in a few slides regarding financing for additional acquisition of affordable housing contracts and new partnerships with the development community. This is what I like to say is the intersection of your 2 goals, housing for all and homelessness solutions.
And we have one slide on our outreach efforts, and this was discussed at the last report item, and we want to make sure that the council's aware that we have reached out and we are taking an aggressive approach at our outreach efforts, working with the city manager's office to get the word out. We've met with CAB, we've met with a number of groups, again, like I mentioned before, met with a regional board, trying to educate people on what the council's goals are, what the direction you're giving it, so we can work together to try to solve some of these issues that we're seeing. So we have been using every method we have available: social media, next door, advertising, the paper, Facebook, CAB meetings, whatever we can find, and reaching out to our boards and commissions to try to get this information out as widely as possible. But as I mentioned before, and as the mayor asked, how are these going to move forward? Well, they're going to move forward in a very public way, and each will have their own program approach. So we'll have timelines, we'll have budgets, and how we're going to do the outreach piece for each one of these elements if we move forward and we have the resources to do so.
Okay, the next few slides talk about the plan to utilize existing staff and consultant capacity by prioritizing current, ongoing, and future funding resources. So we propose to continue to implement the plan with a combination of staff from both departments and legal as capacity exists, combined with program funding as it becomes available. Certainly as department heads, we would like to say we would need additional staff right away, but we understand the limitations, and it certainly would expedite the implementation of all aspects of the plan. But we want to recognize that initial available resources are reliant on one-time funding by fiscal year. So we start with current and proposed funding. We are operating within the items 1 through 3 listed here, where existing funding levels in our departments need to be sustained and eventually increase to implement the many features of the plan. To create an ongoing and future revenue, we propose utilizing the economic and fiscal returns to the city as the housing market and the local economy expands. So that is to say, the increases in property and sales taxes derived from the construction and occupancy of housing units can be used to support ongoing program funding and potentially launch other features of the action plan over time. Initial funding sources. So we're suggesting we sustain current level of general fund support for homeless and affordable housing programs. You sustain the current levels of funding in the Planning and Economic Development Department, including the mid-year budget increases. And here, number 3 is to provide targeted housing action plan program funding. And this is where we want to emphasize the opportunity for a real deliverable during your budget deliberation next week. and that is to provide up to $3 million of one-time funding in the 16-17 fiscal year to create what we call a housing incentive fund, and that would execute key components of Program 1 and Program 5 as well as others. So here's a couple of examples. Program 1B is to create incentives to have developers provide inclusionary units within market rate for sale products. So between the departments, we want to meet with the developers and try to negotiate those affordability covenants as they come in. And as David mentioned earlier, another example would be to invest in regulatory barriers and move some of the stalled developments into construction. Examples in Program 5 were the intersection with homeless services. We can look at purchasing the extension of affordability covenants in deals that are expiring. So in other words, we purchase affordability terms between 15, 30, and 55 years. Many of those are expiring, so this gives us a resource to invite the developer in to see if we can't create an extension of those affordability covenants. It also allows us to visit with the new developers of rental housing to see if we can't create an incentive and purchase affordability covenants within new rental housing developments. And then lastly, work with our service providers to see if we can't create a better link between what I call the boots on the ground, the homeless outreach service team, and landlords, so that there can be really a rapid rehousing component in the overall homeless strategy. And so we are proposing that resource, you allow staff to build program components to hit those types of things in your housing action plan, and you'll be looking at that resource in your budget next week. Ongoing housing funding. So like I mentioned, we want to sustain existing levels. We want to look at how we invest in housing for all, so to show that return to the city through revenues that we can then look at sustaining existing programs and if not growing them. But certainly item 3, we want to emphasize that any local resource we intend to try and match with federal and state grants, the low-income housing tax credit, Proposition 44, housing for veterans. And we're monitoring the governor's budget may revise that proposes up to $2 billion in a bond issuance, another $257 million for housing for homeless people. And then finally on the national level, the National Housing Trust Fund, which was actually enacted in 2008 but wasn't funded until this year. It looks like there's up to $10.1 million coming to California to be allocated. We want to make sure we're aligned to compete for that resources as well as the others if they're approved. And to do that, it helps to have a local match resource through the programs we've been suggesting in this. And then, new dedicated affordable housing. This is, again, we would continue the commercial linkage fee, launch the housing impact fee. As Sean mentioned, work on launching the Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District options, pro-con. You're looking at polling data. Perhaps there's a voter-approved housing tax measure or general obligation bond. New resources to help this effort.
So where do we start? There's a lot here. There's a lot of information, and as we went through this, it's difficult to understand where we want to put our resources first. So what we did, we sat down as a group, identified the priorities, and this is what we came up with. The first bullet here, essentially, is looking at those regulatory reforms that we can do internally, the work that we're doing underway currently. And also creating those housing incentives, affordable housing incentives. And this is what Dave just talked about. If the council decides that that's an appropriate use of resources in the budget cycle, the next step is to put that into action as quickly as possible. Now is the time. So we will be figuring out how to get those moved, programmed, and get those into production. Looking at our housing allocation plan ordinance revision. So again, this is looking at our fees and looking at requiring on-site for sale affordable on-site affordable to moderate units in projects. And so those are things that we can take care of right now, and we can move forward in looking at how those ordinance changes can be made and get input from the stakeholders and move those to the council. The next three on this list, the permit streamlining for entitlements, hillside development revisions, and design review process. Again, those were funded through the mid-year budget process, and so those are currently underway. So we want to recommendation is keep those moving and get those moving as quickly as we can. Again, getting things moving through our permitting process is key in making sure housing gets built. We've heard from day one, and I've mentioned this before, it's time, certainty, and cost. So if we can help reduce time, get things more turned around quicker, find efficiencies, and move things through, that helps achieve our goals.
And if I might, Mr. Guerin, these three pieces, of course, are very important, and they could raise the eyebrows of some of the members of the public, because when they sitting here without any detail, and I think it's important to reemphasize the amount of public input which will be taken at the time that these are discussed, and using the Hillside Ordinance as a good example of an ordinance that has some great elements to it. It was written a long time ago, and we have been able to identify some stumbling blocks that were put into place at the time that need to be discussed and reviewed, and that's also the case with a number of these other items as well. So I think it's important to alleviate anxiety when members of the community see these items being discussed. It doesn't mean that we're getting rid of them. It means that we are looking at them and analyzing them and modernizing them at times to make them reflect the needs of 2016 and beyond.
Absolutely, well said. And none of these items were put on here lightly. A lot of work was put into putting these on this list. There's more information in the report about each one of those. But as you mentioned, as we move forward on these, there are some very real things that need to be addressed in these policies, and all with the intent of maintaining the integrity of what those policies were developed for. I have gone on field trips and site visits on some of these to understand what we're doing and what we're proposing, and I can give you my full confidence this is what I think is the right move to make, and we'll see as this progresses into a public process that more information will be given. We'll identify what we're proposing to change and get input from all the stakeholders to make sure that everyone's comfortable with any change that's made.
Thank you.
The last two, acquisition of affordable housing contracts and developer and landlord partnerships. You just heard about this from the previous slides that Director Gwine mentioned. So with that, we do have one more report item that's coming to you in our housing series, and it's going to focus on the economic, fiscal, and social impact of what we're proposing here today. So building housing has multiple facets. It addresses our housing crisis. It addresses the need for providing housing for all. But it also has a fiscal impact to the city through the construction, through the taxes, through moving people into the city that generates that revenue. So what is that? First, what is that economic impact? And then how do we turn that economic impact back into the system to help further the goals of the City Council? So that's what we'll be talking about in the next report item. We have not set a date for that yet. We did have an original date put out there, but after we get feedback from the City Council tonight, we'll reevaluate what that date is and come back to you and make sure that's widely available to everybody in the press, through all the media and outreach efforts that I mentioned before. So again, let's look at our return on investment, further evaluation of the forecasting, and then ultimately to develop a work plan and budget for the elements as we move forward to give direction that will be worked into the fiscal budgets of either the mid-year budget or the annual budget each year to address these items. So with that, we have a lot here. The report is in front of you and is online. Again, it's recommended by the Housing and Community Services and Planning and Economic Development that the Council accepts this report and then authorize us to develop that work plan that I talked about with the budget and prioritizing of these elements to make sure as we move forward.
Thank you. Well done. Council, initial questions before moving to public comment. I'll just go down the line. Ms. Carlstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, all of you, for an extremely thorough report given in a very excellently moderate amount of time. I just have a couple of points of clarification. First, to say kudos, congratulations. I couldn't be more excited to see this type of report come forward. I want to just look, I'm looking at our attachment 1 which is the full report itself. It's the housing allocation plan impact fee changes, bottom of page 11. And I want to just make sure that I'm clear in your recommendation. it appears that you are suggesting that we return to a requirement for construction of on-site affordable units on for sale development, and then to initiate incentives for on-site inclusionary units in rental units. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, great. And then the only question extant for me at this point is with respect to the $3 million figure that we're suggesting. Does that encompass what we're currently paying in contractors for plan check?
So the $3 million that was referenced today was to focus specifically on incentivizing affordable units through.
Okay.
As
so
part
those
of
are
a project.
additional expenditures that we're making to increase the supply of housing in Santa Rosa.
That's correct.
Would it be fair to say that?
So in the budget next week, we wanted to get direction today. We're planning to bring forward a budget that would, if council so deems it, that would have this incentive fund as part of it as a one-time funding mechanism to jumpstart some of these programs and address what we think are council's priority items. But it's about creating affordable and sustaining for affordable housing within the community. That's what the funds would be used for, and they're a one-time item.
Great. And quickly, commercial linkage fee. Just wanted to double check that was in there. Is that considered in your program, the high priority programs?
So, and again, that's going to be developed through the Nexus study. The contract for the Nexus study is coming forward on the. It's within the next 2 weeks. I can't remember which week it is, but we're bringing forward the contract to do the Nexus study. Included in the Nexus study is commercial linkage fee.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's it.
Go ahead.
I think I'm next. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this forward. I'm excited about the full spectrum Housing for All program. I will save some comments for the comment time, but I do have a set of questions, so I appreciate your patience with the questions I'm about to ask. And I also appreciate my fellow council members' patience. Can you, this may be considered a follow-up. I'm on the slide 5. I will jump back and forth between the online document and the slideshow. It is a little confusing to me how these items will be folded into our 1 through 5 programs. And if they are not folded into 1 through 5 programs and we give prioritizing direction, what happens to these items? Can you clarify that for me?
I'll take a shot at that. So the council direction informed the programs that we identified. So what we try to do with our programs is to touch all these council goals and direction. So all those programs we have cover these in some way.
So
in terms of priority, we will work with the council, get direction
when I
from the
read
council.
program 1 through 5 items, some of these items aren't there.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
Okay. We could. Yeah.
So what I would propose doing, and if that's the request, is allowing staff to come back and take these 7 items and then illustrate where we're tackling that item within the 5, so we can do a follow-up report out on that particular request.
Right. For example, item 6 on this list looks like it might go into program 5, but if we've prioritized.
Well, and it may fall into multiple program areas
Okay.
So that's what I would propose doing, is taking these 7 and saying how if we could get some time to just illustrate how the 5 sort of drawing that chart,
Okay.
saying these are the direction, these are how each of the program areas are going to address those particular 7 directions. I would just request we follow up so that we can do a complete picture on that.
Okay. I don't see any reference to regulation for Airbnb in any of this, and I thought it had gone through as at least a soft conversation. Is it coming back separate from this? Is it in this? Vacation and rentals, for example?
It is currently not in this.
Okay. It's not in, and so can at some point we need to discuss whether that's a factor in our community or not. The county seems to think it is, but it's not clear if it is here. So when we prioritize these items, how is that prioritizing happening? Are we doing it? Is staff coming back with what the priorities are? Do we have data that says these are the most important things? My own orientation would be to say this stuff that has the lowest income affordability should come first, but I'm trying to figure out what you're thinking.
So we took a stab at identifying the priorities for council, and we put that on those slides. And the goal of that was to cover as much of the bases as we could, all range, housing for all. We are receiving feedback today, and if this is approved, what we'll do is develop a work plan based on your feedback, based on staff's input, and what we could accomplish with the resources we currently have.
Okay, so looking at slide 10, I think those items that are involved in program 5 become a personal priority for me. I think program 1 looks very doable, so there's a time versus, how much effort versus bang for my staff time buck. So just looking at those, this may be venturing into comments, so I'll hold it. I just want to confirm on page 14, well, actually, I think it went to page 16. I just want to confirm that we're making direct outreach, social service, environmental, and neighborhood outreach, that we're making direct outreach to entities that were involved in creating some of the ordinances that we're reviewing, so we understand the history and the process of that ordinance review. For example, the Hillside ordinance, how did it come to be? Are we reaching those folks? I think that would be an important thing to do. Within the online document, page 24, and I appreciate my colleague's question. I strongly support the idea that we have inclusionary for sale and we negotiate. I heard the word negotiate as if it had to do with for sale. I think we do inclusionary for sale and we negotiate the for rent because of the legal situation. I don't think that the Palmer has been resolved yet. I think it was Palmer. Okay, page 24. Under B, it's my understanding that small lot subdivisions, single-family homes on lots smaller than 6,000 square feet are required to get conditional use permits. Is that what we're talking about here, or are we talking about recommending a change to that?
The goal of B is to look at zoning for if we want to change densities for a certain, I'm going to give an example. If somebody wanted to put in a higher affordable housing unit project that exceeded the densities per our general plan, we would have to look at a zoning change for that. So what we'd be looking at here is what does that take? How do we go through that process, and how do we work with people to identify those opportunity sites, address the zoning to achieve our goals, and bring those forward in a proactive way.
DRB currently reviews multifamily projects. Is this a proposed change to that?
No.
Okay, thank you. Page 25, Action 3. There are several items here that make me want to ask questions. Has any other community in California done any of these 3 items, and what's the status of that?
So the answer to that, I think, is going to be multifaceted here. You'll get Walter's input on this. But yes, I think people have been looking at mitigation banks. Currently, even the city is looking at mitigation banks for our own city projects. I know the county is currently pulling together a group of people to look at potential mitigation approaches, but we're also looking to reach out to the Fish and Wildlife Service to understand and make sure we understand what they're trying to accomplish to work within their goals, because some of their approaches are changing as well in terms of how they mitigate the new information that they're learning about what a effective mitigation strategy is. And so we need to understand that so we can work that into our projects and work with developers to make sure we achieve those as well.
Yes, Councilmember Coombs, the answer to your question.
Combs.
Combs, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I actually keep one in my drawer.
Oh, yeah,
give to
I got
people
it.
who make that mistake, so you get one.
Okay, the answer is an emphatic yes to your question. The cities, counties, regions all over the state of California have been working on these things for decades. Our firm has worked on these, several dozen of them. They come in different shapes and sizes and responses. So where they have been developed, they have worked very well at resolving the matters. They are difficult and complex to achieve, but once done, everybody's pretty happy.
Okay, is there any way that we can get the details of examples where people are happy? I would love to read those. And I would, I think I'm not the only data person up here. I really like to see where it's working and how it's working in other communities. That doesn't mean that I'm not willing to be creative. I just want to see how it's working elsewhere if it is.
Yeah, fortunately,
the impression that I've had in hearing stories is that folks think they've figured out a mitigation and then the target moves. And I don't mean the salamander, I mean the mitigation target moves.
Well, and that actually becomes part of why we need to be more proactive in our conversations with folks. I mean, I think, honestly, we've sort of left it to the developer to sort some of these things out, whereas the city may need to be in a more active conversation. There may be real reasons why, for example, Fish and Wildlife is insisting on on-site mitigation when you look at other development patterns of other communities, but sometimes we're finding that we need to have a nuanced conversation because not every place has an urban growth boundary. And so, getting into the particularities of our environment is often very important for regulators to understand, but also our federal and state elected officials. So they're not, while they're trying to solve national problems, we bring the prism of our local issues into the fore.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would be tempted to say the devil's in the detail, but I like the nuances in the detail concept. It concerns me to be engaging state and federal elected officials without understanding what it is we're going to be asking of them. And, I appreciate that mitigation of endangered species can cause builders some difficulties, and I do appreciate that, but I also am unwilling to be lobbying to completely undo the Endangered Species Act. So where we are in that gamut, I mean, that's a big range. Where we are in that range of none and all, I need to know where we are before I can.
Well, and again, these are the kinds of things that we would be bringing back to council to receive direction to engage in those conversations. If we did engage, it would be to get a basic understanding of what that elected official understood was going on, because sometimes we need that clarity to understand the larger picture. But advocacy would be at council's direction, not at staff's behest.
Okay, I guess I'm saying I need more information about what advocacy you're suggesting. On page 27, the Hillside Ordinance, it does concern me. I think this is an item that is not directly addressing very low affordability projects. So this would be low on my own personal agenda because this isn't affecting housing for people with the greatest need. It's not common, I think, for the Hillside Ordinance to be invoked for affordable housing. My understanding from my planning commissioner is that planning commission is allowed to approve hillside projects that meet the intent but not all requirements of the Hillside Ordinance, and that there have been at least 2 recent applications where they did so. Is that so?
I would have to check with
Okay.
staff to understand what those projects were and when they went through.
Okay.
Yes.
My planning commissioner basically says, so I guess we need to know is this really a problem, or can the planning commission exempt things? Because my planning commissioner says they can and they have.
So the hillside development ordinance is very prescriptive,
Yes.
and it provides, it's a cost and impact to developing housing. And so what we're looking at here is not to eliminate the hillside development ordinance or change it in any dramatic way. What we're looking at is identifying some unintended consequences of what that policy is.
Okay.
So,
My concern is that if the planning commission can already say they can waive something with unintended consequences, why are we doing this? Because our staff doesn't have a lot of time.
Okay, we'll get back to you on that question.
This is a low priority item for me because staff can already take care of this.
We'll identify that question and
Okay.
get back to you on an answer.
And I would just say part of this is also getting clarity, because a lot of this is up to interpretation, and some of this we may bring back because we need council's clarity on this item. And instead of having a revolving door of a particular staff person, we may actually need to get some clarity from council on application. So I'm always concerned that when it's punted back to us, we may have some real reasons why we need to bring it forward. We may be taking a risk that you all may not be happy with later on.
It's one thing if staff is making the determination, and another if our appointed planning commission is doing it. So if the planning commission is doing it and it's working, bring me back information about why it's not working, because it looks to me as if they've already waived 2 hillside ordinance provisions. Okay, I think that's a comment. I think everything else I have is a comment. So thank you, and I appreciate the work you're doing, and looking forward to seeing the details.
Thank you. Mr. Corsi.
Thanks for this report, and it's great to see this big bag of tools in front of us. I think it's pretty comprehensive. I'm going to be, we went through this plan pretty quickly, and there's a 42-page document here that has a lot of detail to it. I probably can't get to all of my questions here, but I want to hit a few, because even in the detailed document, there's a lot left unsaid and undecided. And my questions, I guess, go to how do we get to those decisions? While it's on my mind, I just want to continue with Ms. Combs' discussion about the hillside ordinance. And while I don't have a problem looking at that at all, I'm wondering why it's a priority. That question just comes to mind, and why is it on the slide with 7 or 8 priorities at the end? And speaking of priorities, going back to your prioritizing of projects that are coming through planning and economic development right now, you've got a 3-tier priority system. Is that clear to the building and development community how a project ends up as a tier 1, tier 2, or 3 priority?
We are as open and transparent as we possibly can be with developers as they come in. Every Monday morning we meet, the building deputy, the planning deputy, and our engineering deputy, identify what projects are on our plate, what are housing projects, what have affordable components to them, and which are the most complete. And those rise to the top in terms of that week's priorities that staff is going to work on. And we publish that list, and it's public. We make that available.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. If applicants know what their priority status is, that's what I want to know. And where do home improvement projects and DIY projects fit into this?
So we process a lot through the department. There's a lot of DIY projects that come through. A lot of them can be over the counter. They could be done through our just normal daily processing of projects. The projects we're talking about are fairly large, substantial housing projects that take a lot of planners' time, a lot of the building plan review. Some of these plans that come in are astronomically massive. I mean, they're this thick in terms of documents. So the normal over-the-counter processing that happens on a routine basis. And some of the metrics we'll be showing you as we move through into the budget process, as we come up in this next year, fiscal year, we'll be showing you those metrics in terms of how many are those typical household DIY projects, how many are big housing subdivision units, and the number of coming through the door homeowner type projects are huge. They're a bulk of our walkthrough through the doors.
Yeah. Are those all priority ones within that group of projects?
We try to deal with everything as quickly as we can. I'm sure you've heard some people say that we're not quick enough, but again, it comes down to volume, resources, and how we can move things through the process. But we're doing our best to get things through with the resources we have at this point.
Okay, but those type of smaller projects are not divided into priority 1, 2, or 3.
No, typically, if it's a deck replacement or a hot water replacement or a solar on a roof, and we do have certain requirements that we have to have certain turnaround times for instance, solar installations, and so those move through the process parallel to these larger housing projects that we're talking about.
Okay. On inclusionary zoning, inclusionary requirements, and inclusionary incentives. There's a lot of discussion in the report about this, and I want to make sure that what we're talking about is, well, the first one of your priorities here is to initiate regulatory reforms creating housing incentives. With inclusionary, there's discussion in the report about making it a requirement for for-sale subdivisions or for-sale projects. And there's also a discussion about creating incentives, and that was the first bullet point that you made in the discussion about our $3 million request that's coming next week. I want to make sure that there's both a requirement and incentives, and that incentives are above and beyond what requirements are. And we're going to be talking about this money next week, and I'm wondering when we're going to talk about what our requirements are on inclusionary.
So we are talking about requirements, but we also realize and we know that if we want that product and we want to require it, we also have to come to the table with some incentives. And so that's the approach we're taking, exactly what you just said. We are going to put some requirements down on the table, but we are going to follow up with, if you do that, we will help you do that. We'll come to the table and we'll match you. Again, as City Manager McGlynn mentioned, a one-time trial period to see, does this work? Will this really help increase this stock and address this issue that we're all facing?
The percentage requirements are kind of, well, I guess that the phrase I'm coming up with is all over the map in this report, and some of them are required depending on the type of project and the type of property that it's on. But at some point, the council needs to set what those minimums are. And what I'm trying to get to is when you foresee us doing that.
So if the council identifies that as a resource that you want to put into this program, we'll be developing that program. Again, that's why it's first on the list in terms of priorities. How are we going to use those, develop a program to move those incentives into production, and what the percentage is, how it's distributed, that all needs to be developed. So we'll be bringing that back to the council and saying, this is our recommendation, this is how we think we can move forward. We won't take the money and just start handing it out. There'll be a program that's developed that has input from a variety of stakeholders and yourself.
All right.
But that, again, the trick on that is it's going to have to happen pretty quickly. We want to get this, we want to have the biggest bang for our buck, and we want to do that now. We don't want to spend a year or two developing a program to put this one-time resource into action.
Yeah, this is I see it as the best way to get below market housing built soon. So I'm with you on that. I would like to see the word requirement in there somewhere in that first priority on that slide, not just incentives. On the habitat mitigation banks, I'm assuming that would be done at some cost to the city. My question would be, for developers to take advantage of those mitigation banks, would we be recouping some of that cost?
If it would work the way the others that we've been worked on, the answer is absolutely yes. They would ultimately be self-funded. There may be some seed money involved and like that, but generally speaking, over time, it would be a revolving fund type of a program. This is how they've worked elsewhere.
Thank you. There's discussion about, there's several places where we talk about density bonuses as an incentive in here. And in some places, talking about affordable projects, a density bonus of 100%, up to 100%. I think that's an idea that we should look at. What I want to make sure is for us to know what our oversight role is when we're talking about projects where we're given a density bonus of 100%. And in one of the sections that Ms. Combs pointed out, there was a phrase about use by right in addition to density bonuses. And so I want to get more clarity on that as we go forward. On the idea of using future revenues that are generated by the additional housing activity that we're hoping to create here, again, a good idea, but right now when we have development and building, or at least when we had development and building in Santa Rosa, those additional property taxes and sales taxes were and are used in other ways. And so I'd like to have more information about if we're taking that incremental increase or part of that incremental increase, what are we giving up on the other side? That's all I have for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I get some clarification as to where we are with the commercial nexus or the commercial linkage nexus study? I've heard something about 2 weeks. Was that the completed product work?
No. You're going to be, that is part of the nexus study we're doing, and that contract with the firm that's been selected is coming forward in the next 2 weeks. So that work will initiate shortly after the contract is approved by council.
And so when would you anticipate, just a ballpark idea, when we would have the data from that study to make this decision?
I'll get back to you all on that. I mean, I was just pointing out that the contract for the firm to begin their work is coming forward in the next 2 weeks. And that's the overall Nexus study. That's one of the elements within the Nexus study.
Okay. And maybe it's not in this report, but something that was missing for me were the metrics on a variety of different areas here. Where would we see some of those? Because I see the objectives, which sounds great, and it'll tie into the next question. So when would we see some specific metrics of each of these different steps to see, is this an effective strategy to accomplish what we want to accomplish?
Again, we'll be working on that once this report is accepted and we can move forward. We'll take those goals and initiatives, turn those into metrics. I rattled off some stats in terms of some of the metrics that we're seeing now in terms of permits released. So those are the things that we're developing right now and reports that we can develop based on this report. So we hope to see those over the next couple months, as we move forward, to give you something that shows how are things moving forward. And again, if the City Council does put resources into this program, such as the $3 million or other resources, we'll need to identify metrics for that as well, as you just mentioned. We want to show that it's successful because essentially it is a pilot project. This one-time money, we keep hearing this will work. Well, let's put it to the test and see if it works. And we have to measure it. We have to show what the results are so we can come back to you and say, yes, this worked, or no, it didn't. We need to try a different approach.
So again, just so we're clear, because I heard you mention metrics about the number of building permits or DIY projects. Those are some metrics. I'm looking at metrics of, with this effort, we're anticipating to have this product, and those are the metrics. That's our goal that we're trying to sustain, because I would think it helps us. Do we need more funding, more resources, or no, this is the number one priority? Does that make sense? Okay. And then that ties into kind of questions about the $3 million. How do we come up with that figure? Because, again, what's hard for me is the metrics. So over $3 million, what do we get? Do we get all of the objectives that were stated early in the presentation?
I'll talk.
Maybe.
So the $3 million number. Again, this is a pilot project. We could have gone bigger. We could have gone smaller. We felt that this was an appropriate place to start to give ourselves a serious whack at this, because if we just put $100,000 or a couple $100,000 into the bucket, it wouldn't achieve much. So we really want to see what kind of impact a substantial investment into this council goal has, and do we see a result immediately and quickly.
Now, how well do you know your finance director? That's the answer to your question. We sat down with the finance director and chatted with her, and she came back with that number as something that was comfortable in the context of the current budget, given the other priorities and restraints.
So we have limited resource. We're trying to figure out I'll be honest, we're looking through these programs, trying to get direction from, again, building the plane as we fly the plane, coming back with the metrics. But again, it could become a never-ending process, honestly, council member, about what the appropriate number is. This is a way for us to get a figure into play that addresses some of the issues that we're circling on, develop some metrics against that number, and then be able to come back and say, do we need more resource? Is this really pulling it forward? But again, I wish I had a purely scientific analysis, but we were looking at those discrete areas of emphasis around affordability, and it was how do we figure we can make an impact in each of those areas, and that dictated the term of the amount of the money coming back. We may find out that some of these areas were not effective, and that may be because we don't have enough resource in the till to be effective in that location, or this particular initiative is, for a variety of other reasons, more complicated than we saw. But again, I'll be honest, we're in an interesting space where we're experimenting a little bit. This is one-time funding that we felt comfortable in releasing to the program, that we felt like could address things like the covenant issues on affordability. So we were looking discreetly at those items and saying, where can we make an impact to get to the $3 million?
And that is helpful, so thank you for that, because where I'm struggling, I know we have an item later on the agenda about roads. So, and that's, I think also there's some, $3 million was identified there, because also, and I wanted some clarification on the $3 million being used for developers, because I also heard something about Housing First and rapid rehousing, and I know the subcommittee on rent stabilization had an interest in exploring the rent mitigation funds to help those with the rapid rehousing. Is this money potentially, could that be used for that, which is a much smaller sum than for a developer?
It could be used for that. I mean, we're open for directions. There's multiple ways that we can take some of the funding and set aside. That one of the challenges is the council's moving on a variety of fronts in a very aggressive manner, and there's limited resource pool. We're going to be bringing back, we just tried to get an idea of what we could be playing with and feel comfortable with all the other obligations that the city was having and trying to make impact on. And so to be perfectly honest, it's about what's available for us and how can we start to initiate some of these conversations and measure some success against deliverables. So sort of in a very similar way when we launched the HOST program last year, working with what we know is some factors and some educated guesswork to come to a figure that we felt like could jumpstart. This doesn't leave you depleted, but it does make an impact against the overall funding resource that we have available to us in one-time monies.
So what involvement and or when would that conversation about here's how we're going to spend the $3 million take place? Would that be next week at the budget hearings, or how would that work?
So if the council next week during the budget hearings allocates those resources, we'll come back with a program approach to how that money gets distributed and works through the process.
Okay, great. And then also in the report, the program number 4, it mentioned Urban 3 and that whole concept that I'm a big proponent of. Can you share with me a little bit more how that would play into here? Because what I recall from the Urban 3 is you may say, okay, housing may not be the big purple thing, but as long as we recognize that, we need to encourage mixed-use development elsewhere to help pay for some of these other projects. So can you share with me how that concept plays into this?
Sure, and it's a big player in this next report item in the economics of what we're doing. And so we'll be factoring in the Urban 3 program, the philosophies and what we learned in that, into what that means to what we're trying to accomplish here. So that's going to be the next report item. So we didn't address it here in the report, but you'll see that coming up.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question was just, it goes back to kind of the metrics and the effective community engagement, because I heard what you had shared, David, about we're doing A, B, and C. And actually for the other Dave, I heard the same thing on the consolidated plan, and I made comments about that. And the results were we still didn't get any public comment. I would just offer whatever metrics we come up with. Let's talk about we want to reach X number of people versus here's what we're doing, because maybe in the past they haven't been that effective. So the results I'd be looking for is actually the community hearing what we're saying. Now we're trying this and no one's listening. Does that kind of make sense as far as a metric what we're looking for?
Absolutely.
Or at least what I'm looking for?
Yeah, and some of those are easy, so we can get the number of people that reached through social media. We have those numbers and can provide those. We do try to reach the biggest amount possible, working with our community engagement division to reach out to as many, and we'll develop those metrics and report back, because I think you're absolutely right. Who are we reaching? Are we reaching the right audiences? And are we getting people involved in the process?
Right. So we've been hearing, here's how we're trying to do it. I'm more focused on the end result. So, and thanks again for this. This is heading in the right direction. I'm very appreciative of it.
Thank you. Mr. Wysocki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also want to extend my thanks for all the work that's been done on this. It's quite a voluminous report and information. Do appreciate it. I'm going to go front to back. I thank my colleagues for a lot of their detailed comments. I will not duplicate them, but the hillside ordinance revision, how many potential sites are we talking about with this?
So that's something we're working through right now. We are developing an RFP, and we're identifying what the sites are that are being held up by these. And this is a mix of all types of housing that it's affecting. So what we're talking about is not projects on a ridge line, and that's what the typical thought process is. But we have some parcels down in the valley that have certain little inclines that are causing time delay, cost delays that are damaging the viability of a project. And so we just want to look at that to see, is that the intent of what we are trying to accomplish with the ordinance, or are there things we can do to try to help facilitate these projects? And so we're going to come back with that.
There's more detail.
Yeah, there's a lot more. And so we'll identify that for you, because I think that's a very good question, and we need to know what the impact is, and should we be spending time on this before we do it?
The programmatic approach to critical habitat mitigation, is this verified habitat or is this potential habitat that we're talking about?
We would be talking about the habitat that exists that would be preserved through mitigation.
But I guess, do we have verified, I think back to the composting central landfill site, and it was a potential loss of habitat there, and the salamander would have to cross Meacham Road, going up the bank, and then climb a hill and pass 2 other vernal pools. That's why I asked the question: is this potential, or do we know that they're there?
Well, that's a biological question, and we obviously can't answer that. As a part of the program, these kinds of definitions would be worked out and hopefully clarified so that there wouldn't be absurdities like the one you just recited.
And to maybe to get to your question, do we know if there's specific projects that have these issues? Is that what your question is getting to?
Well, to me, it seemed like more of a potential for the future. I'm sure there are specific projects that
absolutely.
have these.
Yeah, we have projects right now that are we're working through that have very dramatic mitigation impacts that we're looking at to see how can we mitigate that and make sure that we protect that species, if it's a flower, if it's a salamander, vernal pool, all sorts of things that we have in our community that we want to protect.
Is some of the answers perhaps building around them? Is that a possibility, or?
Sometimes it's not feasible to build a project, so we would potentially exclude some of these housing projects out. So we have a couple projects that we may just not build, which we'll have to make that decision. And then we look at where can we build, and so that's some of these other items. Look at density in downtown.
That's more than what I wanted. Thank you.
Sorry.
Specific plan infrastructure improvement programs. Is that going to be any coordination with our next item, the neighborhood streets, or are those two separately considered items?
So that one actually goes to what I was just rolling into, which is I get my chance here, is specific plans.
Now.
Specific. You asked it. Specific plans to, such as downtown the corridor or the Senators Avenue corridor, or how do we use our specific plans to address some of these issues of not being able to build on the outskirts, but how do we build internally and identify densities that we're comfortable with that the city wants to move forward on?
So would a plan such as the following one that's coming out, I mean, it sounds to me like that cart's ahead of the horse, based on what you just said.
Well, you mean the neighborhood in...
Right.
I guess they're very different. There were concerns identified around housing. We do have some polling data out there that came courtesy of our partners at MTC that said some of the places that in the Bay Area governments are challenged around or how affordable housing and housing in general, and then additionally our roads and our deteriorating roads. And I think while there may be some interplay, like in a lot of places, they're coming from different, trying to address different needs within the community, because right now, I think you'll see in that presentation, where we do work right now is our interiors and on collector streets, and this is an attempt to start to do work in neighborhoods, which are where we're most challenged to do that work, and self-help our neighborhoods and begin a process to build a way for the community to sort of say these are areas of needs, and that's why we're working very closely with the Community Advisory Board on that particular project.
Thank you. Program 3, item D, the revision of policies and procedures for vacation of public rights of way. I strongly support that. I mean, we saw that with North Street. We lost some units because of a useless alley, in my opinion. So I would love to see that reach a higher priority. And then also supporting the single room occupancy projects on program 2. I think we do have some excess capacity with some of the older homes and some of our older residents. I think that could very well help bring some people in from the cold. And then lastly, the reducing barriers to second dwelling unit construction. Can that be expanded to grandfathering in existing non-permitted structures? Can we do something to help folks out that have, obviously they're going to have to be up to code, but what can we do to, because they're out there?
We'll look into that and get back to you as part of this program. We hear the comment, and we've heard that comment from multiple places, so that's definitely something we'll look at and figure out how what we can and can't do. But I think what we want to do is get housing for all, so anything we can do to help facilitate that, we'll work towards.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Olivares.
Thank you, Mayor. This has been a long process and a good process, and I think been a lot of great engagement in this. But going to the actual housing plan, we make reference to the past 6 months and the work that has gone into this, including the collaborative efforts by staff and council, et cetera, and also speaks to the public engagement efforts. Can you just give us an update overview of what those public engagement efforts were along this process?
Sure. We took a couple of different approaches, and actually we have the slide up here right now. We've done multiple presentations to different groups, presentations to the chamber groups, to developer groups, to the CAB. We've reached out to all the boards and commissions. We've utilized all the social media aspects we have in terms of Nextdoor, Facebook, our website. We've issued press releases, got information out in the press, worked with reporters to help educate what we're trying to accomplish. There have been ads, both in the press and on hard copy and digital. So we're trying to pull out every aspect, every tool we have to identify how we have the broadest reach possible. We've learned through multiple projects, including the Tour of California and others, that you have to try every possible way to reach people through every media you have, radio, print, talking verbally, presentations. And still, that typically isn't enough. So we're going to keep working with our community engagement department to identify creative ways to reach out to the public, engage the public, and as Vice Mayor mentioned, identify those metrics that we can report back on. Are we being successful, and can we be more strategic?
And in addition, we're going to be looking at, as we go through the discrete program areas, figuring out where we need to make very specific outreach and conversations around particular topics, council member. This becomes the way that then we can start to prioritize how we do those outreach efforts, identifying what what success is going to look like here. Is there a real issue here? But also, and again, this is where it helps us, coming back to council and saying, we're now tackling this particular issue. Who should we be in conversations with around this particular issue? So we're making sure that we're getting all of those points of view into that conversation and making sure we're having a very good conversation. So this becomes, the document becomes the roadmap for additional outreach, an additional way that we can actually sort of say, okay, we're on this particular topic. Who do we need to bring? Who do we specifically need to bring to the table to address these concerns? And how do we formulate a larger outreach plan? And again, it also becomes a way. I've spoken before that we're thinking about, we're in the process of planning a series of town halls for the fall. This is exactly the material that we can take out to a town hall and say, this is what council's been working on, this is what staff is working on. We can tailor a review around that particular document, or even the topics that we're currently trying to get more detail on. It becomes the tool for that communication, not just the work we've done to date, but the forward-looking work that we're planning on doing as a team moving forward.
Thank you. And I was aware that we have done a lot of outreach, and I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that, because that is very important, and we'll continue to do that. The plan, how does the plan take into consideration any potential housing needs as we move in the direction of the annexation of Roseland? So
one of the approaches here is housing for all. So we're looking at the entire city, entire economic range of housing options. And so all these programs are meant to address any resident of Santa Rosa, and if they're annexed in, they will be part of this program, part of how we approach these, either through incentives, through the variety, the matrix you saw up there on the screen, depending where they fall within what program area exists.
Additionally, I would say, one of the benefits of when an annexation is achieved in that area is going to be the simplification of that process. I think one of the big challenges we're discovering there is actually the confusion that works for everybody around development projects that are located in the Southwest because of where my project falls, who the responsible party is, how do I get a project through the pipeline. It can be very confusing and intimidating. We've set up some own specialized hurdles within the city, but again, that relationship as it's tagged right now is one of the fundamental challenges for that area as it thinks about development opportunities moving forward, is that split up decision-making tree. And so I think this helps simplify it, but I think the annexation itself is really what helps that particular area and its development in its future.
Thank you. Then, as it relates to the regulatory and financial incentives, how will those be determined as we move forward?
So as we mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that first council's okay with identifying those resources and appropriating those resources through the budget process. Once that's done, we'll take a look at how do we develop a program that addresses what we've heard today, addresses what we've been working on, what we think will be successful, and bring forward a program to the city council and say, this is how we propose to develop an incentive program, and that could include regulatory programs as well. And so there's some regulatory items mentioned throughout here. Again, we have the ability for a local density bonus ordinance where that's something we can look at internally to to manage ourselves. We can identify parking restrictions and our parking concessions. When we start looking at second units, I know that's a public process to make sure that's acceptable by everybody. But those are things that we can work through. And so, again, those are things that we're going to recommend, bring back to you, the City Council, and after we've reached out to the public and to individual stakeholders to make sure that we're addressing all the various nuances of these things, because each one has, as the city manager mentioned, a potential target audience that we want to make sure we address before we bring back to you. So hope that answers the question,
Yes.
but we will come back to you with a program once we've identified that the money is something the City Council wants to appropriate.
Thank you. My last question relates to the assembly and offering of public lands for housing developments. What role will our nonprofits play in this? I mean, we have a lot of nonprofits who are in the business, so how will they have access to some of these lands? Will we be giving them considerations as far as purchase or sale?
Probably a blend of a couple ideas. One, our experience through the Housing Authority is if we see a site that has development potential through the land use planning, zoning issues, is we do a joint request for proposals. And that is prior to the Housing Authority actually purchasing the land, we see if we have a development partner in the feasibility of such. And then the second way is the land bank term you heard, is that through an assessment, assembling those parcels and securing them now, even without a developer, but showing the potential in the future, would be an analysis we can conduct.
Well, I only have a couple of questions, actually, and I appreciate all the thoughtful questions the council has asked this evening, and there may be some more after public comment. On page 40 of the plan, there's a reference to drawing on reserves when it comes to, they're mentioning some general fund appropriations. Such funding could also draw on reserves. And that caught my attention because I'm wondering what kind of program we might be considering that would demand a draw on our reserves or suggest taking that kind of action. Page 40, number 3, right before the bullet points. And actually, I assume that's general fund reserves, but
I believe what we mean by that, Mayor, is that it's undesignated reserve, much like the consideration of the $3 million next week in your budget. So your reserves would stay at your policy, but if income to the city exceeds that, it would be.
We'll look at that language. I think Director Gwine is correct. I think what was meant there is anything that would fall above the policy, which is the council directed policy, I believe is 17%. So this would be utilizing one-time funds available to the council to move forward this. It was not meant to reflect an active rating of the reserve levels. So the note is taken, and we will adjust that language to head off any concern there.
I appreciate that. It's going through a 40-page document and 3 little words caught my attention. Also, I'm curious, and this may have already been addressed, but in the impact fees, is there a place in the plan that deals with the floor area metric versus the per unit fee in the recommended discussions or analysis? This was something that has been brought up before, a change in how we address our impact fees. Square footage of the housing units as opposed to units per acre.
That did come up multiple times. We have heard that, and we will be evaluating that to determine the feasibility of it. I
didn't see it here, and I thought maybe I missed it. It's a big document.
So any changes in fees that we are talking about in terms of permit fees, that would need to have a nexus study done to bring that forward. The nexus study that we've been talking about tonight will be addressing some of the demand fees and linkage fees. We are not talking about the overall permit fees, the cost of bringing bringing your permit in to get a building permit.
Okay.
That's not included in this nexus fees. So when we start looking at those fees, we would wrap that type of information. We're collecting that information, collecting those concerns. So when we do update fees or we do a nexus study for our processing fees, we can incorporate that analysis and bring forward a recommendation to the City Council at that time.
Excellent. I appreciate that because I think of it as one of our tools in how we make changes for the future. Well, Council, I can move to public comment if they're having no other questions at this point. Ann Seeley, followed by Chuck Cornell.
Mayor Sawyer and Council, I want to compliment you first on being the council, in my experience, that has forthrightly undertaken this incredibly serious problem more than any I've ever seen. That goes back to 1992 when Concerned Citizens for Santa Rosa, whom I represent, helped devise the Growth Management Ordinance along with its complementary housing allocation plan. That was a long time ago. Many of the ideas that are being proposed, first, I want to also compliment staff and everybody involved with the housing plan for the very robust addressing, and our consultant, of course, for the very robust addressing of this question. Many of the ideas in this plan, such as inclusionary zoning, such as a commercial linkage fee and other things, have come forward before. And I'm not here to say been there, done that. I want to say these have come forward and gone nowhere or been pushed to the background. If we want to see, especially in the near term, something start happening, I suggest we have a conference, a sit-down, look them in the eye meeting with housing advocates, with the developers of, for instance, the projects that have already been issued permits but haven't built them yet, and any other interested developers, as well as city staff and council members, and talk about what can make things go forward. Many things have fallen to the wayside just because we've all been sitting in different rooms. We haven't been consulting each other. This goes back to when, in the 1990s, I asked Arnold Sturdenberg, who then represented Burbank Housing, if he would meet with for-profit developers to help them understand how to access funding sources that they themselves have been using. And I got a very steely stare at that time and no results to it. But we need to be talking to each other. There's a county group called the Housing Advocacy Group who has the interests of all the county in mind, but especially in Santa Rosa. They need to be invited to this conference, to this sit-down meeting. So I encourage you to do that. And I last want to say that we do have to hold the line against attempts to remove all public comment on projects, and also against the attempt to remove CEQA from the picture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann. Chuck Cornell, and Chuck will be followed by Edie Sussman.
Good evening. I'm Chuck Cornell with Burbank Housing. I'd like to thank the Council for its continued focus on the affordable housing crisis, and certainly thank the staff for their report on and Housing Action Plan report and presentation today. It's really got a lot of great ideas and a tremendous amount of good information, and it's really great to see and inspiring. I'd like to offer also Burbank's help as a resource in the solution of these problems. If you feel there's a place where we fit in, we're happy to help in any way we can. And of course, continue to be a partner with Santa Rosa in the production of affordable housing in the city going forward. I'd like to highlight just some of the ideas. There are certainly a lot of ideas in the presentation, but highlight some of the ideas that we feel would have the most impact on the production of affordable housing and the people that we serve. In particular, the ordinance on preventing discrimination against those with vouchers. It's a really great proposal. Also, basing impact fees on square footage, not on the number of units, as Mayor Sawyer mentioned. Implementing a jobs housing linkage fee, and really have to say, of course, the bond or tax measure for raising funding for affordable housing production. I'd like to stress this last one because I really feel that it has the greatest chance of making the biggest difference in the funding on a scale that we need to address the large need that is presented in that graph that's in the presentation at the extremely low and very low levels of affordability. These local funds are just hugely important in raising and winning tax credits, which provides just huge leverage in the production of affordable housing. It's been our key tool over the past 15 years or more, 20 years, for producing this deeply affordable housing that really is our mission. It pays for about 50% of the project costs. It's in virtually all of the 700 units that we have in Santa Rosa. I just want to stress that tax or bond measure is really key to raising enough funds locally to win these tax credits that serve these extremely low and very low populations. Lastly, I just want to give you an update, maybe on the brighter side, on projects we have in Santa Rosa. Our Catalina project, which you've heard about before, 60 units of self-help for sale housing in Southwest Santa Rosa, about halfway through construction right now. Expected to finish phase 1 in September and phase 2 in January. And the Crossroads project is 79 units of family rental tax credit financed in Southwest Santa Rosa as well. That will close its financing for construction in September. And thank you very much for your support.
Thanks, Chuck. Edie Sussman, and Edie will be followed by Adrian Lobby.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, council members, I'd like to start by thanking you and staff for all of the information that we've been provided here. By way of background, I've been involved in housing issues in the city and county for over 30 years, primarily as an attorney representing tenants, but in various other capacities as well. So I'm extremely pleased to be standing here talking about some nuts and bolts about what we're going to do as opposed to what we might want to do. With regard to the Housing Action Plan draft, your page 10 of the attachment, item number 7, says considering a non-discrimination ordinance for Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing, HUD, and other voucher users. I did not see in the implementation approach anything related to that, and I understand from the presentation that the staff is gathering some information, but I think it's important for council to understand how important this piece is to your plan for housing for all. And to that extent, I just wanted to make sure that the council understands that the way the HUD vouchers work, and I think there's approximately 2,000 in the city of Santa Rosa for 2016. It's not public record for me to find that per se, but the way the voucher program works is individuals are given basically 2 to 3 months to find a place. And we all know in this housing market how difficult that is. And if they cannot find a place, they can have an extension of up to 16 months, but then they lose their voucher. And I would say anecdotally, because again, there's no public records on this, it would be interesting to have some staff provide some information on this. A huge proportion, maybe 80 to 90% of rental units out there do not accept housing vouchers. So you're in a situation where you have a program that could prevent homelessness, provide and maintain affordable housing because the rates are set by fair market value that are not being utilized to the extent that they could be. And so it's really important that we have an anti-discrimination statute. It's a win-win program for everyone because the landlords are not at risk of not being paid because the government pays for most of the rent, and the tenants are protected And they work really hard in general because vouchers are so difficult to come by that they maintain the premises. It's a no budget hit for the city, so it seems that the city should be trying to the extent possible to make sure that we use all those vouchers that are out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Adrian Lobby? Is Adrian here? She left? All right. Linda McDaniel. Is Linda here? Alan Danley, followed by Brian Lee.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. I brought some notes here, but my phone's about to die. I just want to follow up on the previous speaker. It has become a common practice here amongst landlords in Sonoma County to deny applicants with Section 8 vouchers and the VA vouchers, whatever those look like, due to a perceived or real idea that either of these groups represent substandard tenants. These landlords place the entire focus on profits and perceived lower risk while, simultaneously discriminating against the county's most vulnerable people. I own a carpet cleaning business, so I go into people's homes all the time when they move out because it's usually a part of their contract to have the carpets cleaned. So I hear their stories as to why they're leaving. And more what I'm hearing here in the city limits, and I've been in touch with Councilwoman Combs about this, I don't need my comb later, that people are getting these notices from their landlords that we need to take an inspection of your property to inspect them for necessary repairs. And then what they're doing is they're going into the homes and they're finding necessary repairs that are going to require the tenant actually leaving, be it a roof or pipes or something like that. I have a friend of mine currently right now who has a bunch of children over up Dutton Avenue, lives in a complex like this, and he sat by and watched a number of his fellow tenants get these notices and then be evicted from the property for the repair reasons, and then they're allowed to come back, of course, but that's at the accelerated rate, going from $1,600 a month up to $2,100 a month, which is what the landlord considers fair market value. The provision 7 that they talked about up there, I noticed also when I read the flyer that we have here, there are no provisions for that, and that desperately needs to be in there. Otherwise, we're going to have a steady influx of people finding a way to run around the regulations that you guys are going to implement with your new fair housing, and we'll have an increased amount of people applying for the veterans' homes and Section 8 homes. A lot of the people I know that have the Section 8 vouchers, I think the 80 to 90% that she was talking about is a little low. I'm thinking it's more like 95. And if you have a Section 8 voucher, if you can't find a place in Burbank housing, you're just going to be out. And I know people that are moving to Lake County and lower rent places in Marin City, out in the sticks, somewhere else, simply because they cannot find a place to use that voucher. Please find a way to enact legislation in with your new program to allow a non-discriminatory clause to prevent these landlords, at least a select number of them, so that some of these people have a fighting chance of getting a place once they get evicted. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Brian Lang will be followed by Thomas Ells.
Thank you, member, council members, and staff. Some great strides tonight. We're fully supportive and encourage your support to continue this process and give the staff the tools that they need to get this implemented. Implementation clearly is the ticket to out of this problem. There's another housing group that I've been participating in. It seems like there's a bunch of them these days, but it was kind of started that, if we treated this housing crisis like a natural disaster that happened recently in Napa and happened recently in Lake County, you find ways to get houses built, and maybe that's the attitude we need to take. I'm not sure we're there yet, but we're certainly approaching it. It was just an interesting concept that I heard. I thought it's worth repeating. I just want to also encourage staff and the council take whatever efforts possible to accelerate this process. We all know it took years, decades to get to this, but it can't take years or decades to get out of it. Taking a long time, any lack of urgency is not going to do serve our community. Lastly, a reminder, my workforce hat. If we magically had permits to build houses today, we'd have an awful tough time finding workers to hammer the nails and saw the boards and everything else. So a reminder that in addition to all our efforts towards this program, anything we can do to support both the public education system, the private education system, on construction projects, career tech education projects, they're imperative. And to me, it's talk about a win-win-win. This program can create jobs. If we've got the education to supply those jobs and we're getting houses, we might get to have our kids stay around. I've got one in Denver and one in Washington, D.C., and I don't think they'll be coming back anytime soon. But sure would be nice to stop that trend of having our children leave. So this could take care of a lot of those problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas will be followed by Michael Cook.
Thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and these are great strides. All these things are great. Maybe the hillside ordinance adjustments, as Councilmember Combs was saying, might not be a big priority because of the expense of those types of homes. They're built-in expenses on the hillsides. The word I was struggling for over there, forgive me, was quorum, and you know what I was talking about. Commercial linkage fees, great, very important. Impact fee reductions, incentives, and so on, tax measures, great. Chuck was talking about bond issues, very important. 1986 Tax Act removed municipal bonds from the ability of local banks to own them and put them in the Federal Reserve. That's what I was talking about a month ago from the 1986 Tax Act. It's unfortunate, but those measures, you can have a district, form a district, 1911, 1915, 1917 Bond Act, districts that will provide for infrastructure, but you can also put on yourself a district and do other kinds of infrastructure. Very important, very good. Rates are maybe seemingly high, but much less than construction financing right now. So it's a really good and important tool. As he said, 50% of the financing available for the housing could be and has been from bond issues. Very important. Nexus, that's going to be interesting. So we'd like to see that on the linkage fees. Very important. $3 million, very important. It should be on a multitude of types of projects. So I like Councilman Schwenholm's direction or interest in that several kinds of things, very small. There's a lot we can do, and I'm going to approach the council and hopefully do something here in the very near future, be more proactive on that with very, very small, and I hope you'll be interested in looking at those kind of things. Very small houses, very inexpensive houses. It's a question of what kind of incentives can be obtained in order to reduce the fixed costs of those, meaning the city's costs, infrastructure costs, and all those things. How do you reduce that? And it really all depends on how we can concentrate things and make savings for everyone so that the overall cost is. And for smaller houses, you can't have as many kids. People don't intend to have as many kids, and so the impacts on schools are less and so on. Roads are less, particularly if you have less driving, or less people have less funds available, so they can't afford as many cars or drive as far, and so there's less impact on the roads. So looking forward to all of these things. Are wonderful. It's a great movement. Thank you very much. And the devil is in the details, so we want to not turn loose the tigers, but create the housing that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Michael Cook will be followed by Josh Katz.
Good evening. Mike Cook, and I've been part of some of the task force that have gotten together to talk about housing in Santa Rosa, and I remember over a year ago. I think I was here speaking to you all and suggesting that the city create a housing task force. I don't think the city council wanted to do it that time, but maybe now's the time, and maybe a year later, it's really impressive that the city's put together this housing action plan, and maybe it's time for that housing task force. I congratulate staff, council. This housing action plan is something I don't think I've ever seen done before. We've gone in the last year farther than I think we have in the last 20. So I really appreciate all the work the staff's done, that you all have done, all the public hearings that you've done. It's really impressive, and I hope we keep going at the same pace, because we really do need housing in Santa Rosa. I just wanted to highlight a few things in the action plan, and that's what I think it is. It's an action plan. So all of your questions were really good. I do hope that we approve, or you approve, the action plan tonight, because I don't think we can waste any more time. And I think that's exactly what it is. It's the action plan. I think it can be modified. I think you all will direct the progress, and I'm hoping that, I'm hoping that you guys approve it tonight. The action plan identified capacity constraints and related difficulties involved in obtaining development entitlements. That's 100% the truth. It takes years to get entitlements for housing. We can't keep letting that happen. Progress has been made, but we need to keep making progress. The items regarding the opportunities in the future in paragraph 3 on page 1, I completely endorse, and I think it's great the city, the department has finally recognized that there are issues that need to be fixed, and they're working on fixing them. One thing that I'd really like to see first is, I think one of you asked about the 3,400 units that keep getting talked about, that are, just a barrier away from being entitled. What are those, and how are they being obstructed? Let's make that a priority. Let's actually identify the barriers that we have, or that each of the units have. And then hillside development standards, or permit, that is huge. And I know it might not be a priority for some of you, but it's a priority for getting housing. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think you're looking at your task force. Josh will be followed by Steve Dunright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Josh Katz. I am an attorney here in Santa Rosa. I often deal with housing issues. I want to make a couple points, most of which have been touched on already. One is the prohibition against income discrimination, I think is very critical, not just in terms of stopping homelessness, but also in terms of who we are as a community. With income discrimination, you end up with a de facto segregation, which by itself leads to sort of the cycle we're trying to break by giving people housing. Also, I think it would be improper in any other context to say to someone, you can afford my product, but I don't like you because I think you're a poor person. It wouldn't work in a restaurant. It wouldn't work in a grocery store. It really shouldn't work with housing. And other communities have stopped it, and there's no reason why that kind of discrimination can't be stopped here. I also want to put in a plug for robust code enforcement, which wasn't discussed today. It's critical to addressing substandard housing, not just in prevention, but also in terms of addressing it once something is brought to the city's attention. That department needs to be, continuously funded and probably expanded at this point to be able to address those problems. For tenants and for neighbors, going to code enforcement is generally a last resort. So they're usually getting involved in some pretty significant problems. And it's important that they be able to respond, that they have the manpower to respond, and also that they have the sort of back office capacity to be able to follow through when they do address problems. Finally, I was going to touch briefly on the tiger salamander mitigation. To the extent, I have a lot of concerns about the city spending efforts trying to figure out how to build in areas that might not otherwise be buildable. But to the extent the city is going to directly and or indirectly subsidize that development, I think it needs to be for a very specific purpose rather than a sort of trickle-down hope that if there's more housing, it's going to make everything better, because I don't think that necessarily works. So I would hope that if the city, and again, it's going to have to be either a direct or an indirect subsidy, or the city's help wouldn't be needed with respect to a mitigation bank. To the extent the city is spending resources to do that, I think it should be for a very specific and very targeted reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Dunright will be followed by Kevin Conway. Steve here? Kevin? Followed by Steve Bertelbaugh.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This housing action plan seems to me to be outstanding. It's thorough, it's innovative, it's collaborative, and it shows a real commitment to the housing crisis. And without the plan, the rent stabilization efforts are going to be only half effective. So to me, it's an absolutely necessary complement to rent stabilization, and I strongly encourage you to pass it. And this is important because I didn't hear anything about it in the presentation, I certainly hope that all of the housing units that will emerge from this plan will adhere to the action items that are either recommended or mandated by the Climate Action Plan of 2012. It's very important that we show the same commitment to implementing the Climate Action Plan as we do to addressing the housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve will be followed by Georgia Berland.
Thank you, Mayor Sawyer and members. It's been said that the most important part of this is the bond measure or the tax measure, and I would suggest that the bond measure is going to be the sign of whether we're really going to get something done. This is a marvelous planning effort. We need to take all the steps that are mentioned here, but we know that whatever we do, we're going to have the money to implement it. So let's move that to the top of the list. Let's get it done this November, and make sure that once we have all of the ducks in a row, we have the money to make it work. The one other suggestion that I would make is that we need to take a look at parking ratios. An awful lot of land gets consumed for parking. And to the extent that we're working on plans for people to be able to walk or use other ways of getting around, we don't need to impose minimums on developers. Let the developers decide how much parking they need. Let's change the parking minimums to parking maximums and free up some of that land for use for housing. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Georgia will be followed by Andrea Osgood, sorry.
Thank you. I'm Georgia Berland, and I'm a member of the board of the Sonoma County Task Force for the Homeless. I want to thank you, too, for this plan. We really appreciate the depth and breadth of it and your commitment to pursue it, which has been really courageous as well as diligent, so we appreciate that. We particularly appreciate some of the innovative housing styles that you're looking at, SROs, modulars, taking sites from public lands, affordability covenants so that 20 years down the line we're not losing all the housing that we create that's affordable. I also want to emphasize the importance of the bond measure that's included here. I think that's particularly important as well. The anti-discrimination for vouchers, that's also key to making this work, and pushing for legislation to bring more funds in and your willingness to match to bring those funds in. I think that in the long run it will clearly pay off. I do have one question, and that is how this plan can integrate with the policymakers' toolbox for ending homelessness. That to me was the light at the end of the tunnel that says if we can dedicate 2,200 units in the next 10 years, we're talking a pretty long horizon here, that we would be able to actually end the problem of having people sleeping on our streets and in tents and in campgrounds and everywhere we look, because there is really no place for them. And we'd be able to bring all of those people inside. I know that in building new housing, that's going to make more available for everyone, but not immediately, and particularly not for the extremely low income and people with no income. We appreciate your funding of shelters and other homeless service programs. That's essential, but it also keeps people homeless. It doesn't keep people homeless, but it doesn't move them out of homelessness. These are things that serve those who are already homelessness. We want to get those people housed long term. And we really think if we can find a way to integrate your plan with that policymaker's plan and dedicate some of this housing to homeless people, we can really end homelessness in our lifetimes. And that, to me, would be a miracle that we could really make come true. So thank you.
Thank you. Andrea.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. My name is Andrea Osgood. I'm the Director of Real Estate for Eden Housing. We are a nonprofit affordable housing builder and also own 2 developments here in Santa Rosa that we purchased recently. We're also a ground-up developer, and we've built several apartments for low-income families and seniors in the county and nearby Petaluma. I want to first commend you for tackling this critical and timely issue, and staff for such a comprehensive plan and a lot of work. I think there's a lot of really great stuff here, but I want to just briefly touch on sort of the 2 most important things, at least from a builder and a nonprofit affordable housing builder, which is land and money. So let's start with land, because you can't build anything unless you have it. I really I'm glad to see that there's a public land for public good approach and solution here, and would encourage that as a great place to start. And then, of course, money. Once we have a project envisioned and entitled, the money and the local money is really critical, and it does help leverage a large amount of additional money. Tax credits is, of course, mentioned in the report, but I think it's also important to recognize there's new money at the state level through the cap and trade program, that local money needs to be in place. It's only in its 2nd year now, but it's highly funded through an ongoing source. I think this year they had $400 million in that program, and it really is a great source of funding that your local money could leverage on potentially publicly owned land. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing the results of all of this hard work. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all the cards I have on this item this evening. I'll bring it back to the council. Council, final questions or comments? Ms. Combs?
Thank you. And thank you very much again for bringing this forward. I have a couple of comments. One of them is that I think I'm going to need some sort of a chart that makes it clear to me how we're changing certain processes. So if DRB is doing the review, or if planning is doing the review, or if it's going to be an over-the-counter by right, and then if it goes to DRB, what are their comment limitations? If it goes to planning, what are their comment limitations, so that we can see what comments aren't being allowed to be made during the process because we're streamlining a process. I just want to make sure we have a safety net to make sure we have the right project at the right place. I think we can do that. I really want to support our movement toward predictability and timeliness. And I think I see that happening here. It's really exciting to see that. I think we can do that and maintain the quality of life, maintain the right projects approach. We have PDAs, priority development areas, that have been designated. I think we have 5 of them, though one of them is in 2 parts. No, I'm pretty sure I've counted recently 5. Santa Rosa Avenue and Mendocino, North Station area, Central Station area, Roseland, and the Sebastopol Road. I think that's it. So there may be things that we might not want to do outside of priority development areas that we would do inside them. And so some of the stuff that we're talking about that might make me a little nervous in one area might be just fine for me in a PDA. So I'm hoping that we can look at specifically the priority development areas. I liked that we had a public commenter who mentioned parking and maybe linking parking to density and giving parking, diminished parking bonuses for more affordability or for more units. I very much appreciated the comment about education and the apprenticeships programs. I think when we bring forward project labor agreement language, that comes with apprenticeship programs that keeps our people, our young people trained in good jobs. With the tax measure, or the bond measure that we're talking about for the ballot, I think mixing the bond measure with this housing action plan becomes a job stimulus package. And I love how we're making that kind of synergy. I think there's a lot that we can get as a community benefit out of that kind of synergy. So mixing the bond measure, again, with the housing action plan, it really makes things work for us. I think we need to keep our focus on building the affordable units. For me, that's the priority. And ultimately, it's the market rate units will take care of, the market will take care of market rate units for the most part. But the market can never take care of the very low affordable units, the units for people who don't have any money, the units for people who are at 30% or less. So I'm hoping that we can keep our eye on the building by prioritizing a focus on building those affordable units. I think we can meet our affordable needs without abandoning our commitment to our environment. I think we can do it without abandoning a commitment to open and transparent processes or to engaging our neighbors. I think we can do it without damaging the quality of life we have in Santa Rosa. And I see that it is also our staff's intent. I think everybody in the room has that as a fundamental intent. And I'm delighted to see that. I think we can move forward together that way. So again, I want to emphasize that we preserve what we have, that we look at the new construction for low and very low, those inclusionary fees. It seems to me that it should be possible to have some kind of division, like it may be a total of 20% inclusionary, but we could do 10% very low and 10% low moderate. I mean, there might be some way to get that extra checkbox in that line on projects 1 through 5 to get that top one to include some of those lower checkboxes. This is a really courageous plan for staff. I think it's courageous for my fellow council members too, me too. There are things here that I might hold my nose about, but if we can move things forward together and get the housing we need, that's where we need to go. I want to thank you for including our community advisory board. I know my next door has told me repeatedly that we are having meetings, so I very much appreciate that. But I also know that there were some key groups that didn't know until I told them a couple of days ago, and they were like, why can't I get noticed sooner? So I think we have some opportunities there to expand how we notice folks. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Combs. As a nod to Councilmember Carlstrom, I'm going to try to go back to process. So are there any other questions that council has before we entertain a motion and move to final comment? No, I didn't ask. So seeing no further questions, Mr. Oliveris, you have this item. So I'd like to entertain a motion and a second, and then we'll take final comment.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. I will make a motion to accept the housing action plan and authorize staff to develop the work plan for prioritizing the housing initiatives outlined in the report.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. And final comment. How about you, Ms. Carlstrom?
Just briefly, I know you're shocked by that. Thank you. I am really excited to be able to once again cast a vote in favor of a lot of these items. I have been a little frustrated with this process only because I have literally been sitting at this dais for 6 years voting for some of these initiatives, starting as a planning commissioner, and it is a revolution. I can recall casting a vote and having a vote go before council only to have the report changed on some of these items so that the council didn't vote the way we thought that they would. I will reiterate my support for requiring the on-site affordable inclusionary units, inclusionary zoning, the density bonus structure, much of which has been in place for a long time. I just would love to see that expanded to the units that are coming forward. I reiterate my long support for commercial linkage, jobs, housing linkage, when that study comes forward. And certainly I support the review of a tax and or bond structure. But I really appreciate you putting a dollar figure before us. That's certainly something I've been looking for, so that we can continue this conversation publicly of we are making very significant investment in the available supply of housing in Santa Rosa. So thank you for allowing us to be a council that actually moves the ball down the field. Thank you for allowing us to make progress. I know the pace at which we are pushing you has been crushing, and I appreciate your responsiveness.
Thank you. Mr. Wysocki?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to see this come forward the way it has. I did want to also, I neglected to mention that Airbnb regulations, I think, would, for some point in the not too distant future, might help some of our existing neighborhoods deal with it. I think it is going to increase. I've already gotten complaints, and I failed to follow up on that earlier. I also did like hearing the parking maximum idea. If people want to pay for their cars to park, that's fine. But we shouldn't be requiring people or developers to choose between cars and people. I'd rather prefer the people. And then lastly, the point about the cap and trade, the matching dollars, I think is a very good one. I'd like to see us make sure that we're aware of any of those opportunities that may exist. That is a sustainable funding source. That's not going away. And this is a world of leveraging, as we all know. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Oliveris.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to reiterate how important this issue is for our entire community. And I know that we mentioned in the plan the collaboration that has happened since we've started this process. It's short and brief, but I want to make sure that as we continue to move forward, that we document what that collaborative effort is, so that we ensure that, again, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, we want to be able to look back and truly demonstrate that this was a strong collaborative effort by an entire community, because this is an important issue that impacts all of us. So again, I just want to make sure that we do that as we move forward, is to document those collaborative and outreach efforts that we do conduct.
Well said. Mr. Corsi.
Thank you, and thank you, staff, again, for all of this work. I said a few weeks ago when we were working on the rent stabilization ordinance that, I think we need to do a lot of things, and some of them are going to make us uncomfortable. And this is a menu that includes something for everyone with discomfort issues. But I still believe we need to do all this stuff. So I'm glad to see it. I want to make sure that we all understand where we are talking about expending city funds and providing incentives, that these are efforts to produce below market, for the most part, to produce below market housing. I think it's completely appropriate that we're working on improving our processes, streamlining our processes, making everything more predictable. And that goes for market rate housing as well as below market rate housing. But market rate housing, if we get if we get our processes right, it will take care of itself. The market will take care of itself. That's why it's called market rate. So I'm looking forward to the other things that we're going to do to spur the production of below market rate housing. And I think that we're well on the right path to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Let's just put these words into action. I think time is of the essence. Let's just get her done. Thanks.
Well said. You know, one could say that the silver lining to our housing crisis is bold action. And we have been and continue to be acting boldly to try to respond to this crisis. And I want to thank the community for supporting our endeavor, and thank the staff for coming up with a truly comprehensive action plan. This is a great deal of work, and people will be talking about the actions that we are taking currently for years to come, and it will change the face of housing in Santa Rosa. And I'm very proud to be a part of a council that's been willing to take these bold steps. So with that, we have a motion and a second, and your votes, council. And I have 7 enthusiastic ayes. Thank you very much. We'll take a half an